Hello and welcome to another instalment of our occasional podcast called I Wish I Hadn't. I'm Dave Hill.
And I'm John Wyatt. As you can tell from our names, David and Jonathan, we were born in the 1950s, so we've had many years to accumulate embarrassing moments which we now feel happy to share.
The dictionary defines regret as a sorrowful remembrance, a sense of loss. But we're not in the business of sorrow and loss here. We're dealing with those things in life that we might wish had been otherwise, but which we're now prepared to own up to.
Today we rummage through the office waste bin to expose the low points of our work and career histories. Now then, I have only done 4 full-time jobs in my life, and you have technically only done 1, haven't you, really?
This is true. This is very true. Yes.
Lots of different aspects of your job, but you know, I mean, I guess one of the obvious things to start is, what is the worst job you've ever had?
Yes.
I've got.
I'm quite happy to start on that, John, because I have 2 contenders for that.
Okay.
The first one took place when we were just about to leave school, and took place at Melplash Court Farm, where, if you recall, I had to work in an industrial-sized grain dryer.
Yes.
And the grain dryer was incredibly noisy, well, not dirty, but dusty. And I had to wear a mask all the time and set this sort of jet engine off that dried the grain, that could take it to be processed elsewhere. And it got up your nose, it got in your ears, it got in your throat.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing you could do about it, even with a mask on. And of course, the masks in those days were like a little silver foil thing with a pad at the back. Nothing in industrial size at all. And I'd be in there for about 8 hours, just breathing this in. And it was horrendous. Before I actually started drying the grain, of course, I had to clear out these massive bins that they stored it in, which over the winter had become the home of each one had probably had about 30 different mice in their nests. And they had to be sort of moved, swept out of the little door at the bottom, screaming round your legs and squawking, which was quite horrendous at the time. It was a bit like a horror story, really.
It sounds
so. That was the first one contender, which I think you'll agree is fairly high in the stakes.
Definitely, yes.
The second one was when I was at college and I got an evening job, basically cleaning toilets in a print works. And the print works, obviously, you had ink all up the walls and everything that had to be cleaned, as well as the, shall we say, less than hygienically sound toilets. And they mixed together, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So it was what you might call inky shit.
Nice.
It was horrendous. So those 2 are my sort of contenders for the worst jobs I ever had, I would say.
I think the worst one I ever did was working in a plastics factory, again when I was a student. I only did it for 6 weeks, and it was shift work. So you did an 8-hour shift, and it cycled. So you did 8 till 4 one week, 4 till 10, and then 10 till 8 or something like that, And we were producing inserts for Waddington's games and tomato trays, and as they came off this sort of heated roller, a long sheet of plastic, you lifted them into a box and sealed up the box. Every time you lifted one of the pieces of plastic off the roller, you got a mild electric shock. So for 8 hours you were having a series of and it was in Ely in Cambridgeshire, and the people who worked there were from the Fens, so of course they all had 6 fingers, as we know. But one of them, one of the guys I worked with, just whistled non-stop for 8 hours, which I could have killed him at the end of that. And then I ended up just doing night work, which paid the most, but it was a pretty grim job. I mean, it was,
Mm,
but it paid money, so in those days you didn't worry too much, did you?
absolutely.
That
Yes. Yeah.
first job I ever had, I was sacked from. It's the
Oh, right. Okay.
only time I've ever been sacked. I was about 12, and it was the Bridport Arms in West Bay.
Mm,
Bridport Arms. Yeah, anyway, the one near the beach, and
yes.
me and a friend had to pile up the used bottles after that had been used in the pub the night before, put them in crates and stored
Yeah.
in this beer locker. And we did this for several months, and then eventually the publican said, "I'm going to have to let you go, boys, because you're stacking the crates too high for the draymen."
Right.
So we were 12. Um,
They didn't think of asking you to just stack them a bit shorter or anything like that. Then
Maybe there was something else to it. I don't know, but
it sounds a bit suspicious to me, I have to
I guess it
say.
is, isn't it? Really? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, your main career, you were successful and had a
It was yes, it was a long and varied career in teaching. I have to say that one of the things that I've worked out over the years is that as far as education establishments is concerned or are concerned, I was actually a bit of a Jonah because when I look back at the various places I've worked, right from when I started teaching practice, right until the end of my career, really my full time career, each building has subsequently been knocked down and is either now housing or supermarkets. Um, and I can trace all of them, and it comes a point when you think to yourself, is it me?
so
Is it me that's the one that's caused this to happen?
there's no
I don't
building.
think it is, but they've all sort of become, yeah, just the bulldozers moved in, knocked them all down, and they've ceased to exist. So,
That's the
so
opposite.
at the end of the day, my the mark I left on those places is now gone.
That's the opposite of having a blue plaque, isn't it? Dave Hill
It is really, yeah,
worked here. That's
yeah,
why we've demolished it. We don't want
yes, yeah.
the taint of Dave Hill to remain with this building.
Yeah, David Hill worked here and the years underneath it, and gone and forgotten.
Yeah.
That's
Well, now that you and I are both retired, I mean, and both loving it. I think
mm,
things I would say that I wish I hadn't had in during my career was boredom,
mm,
because I got bored at work. I'm never bored in my own time. So
no,
I was kind of paid for being bored, which seems sort of like an okay deal. But I was always rather resentful in all the jobs I did that they had its boring moments, and I would think to myself, I wish I wasn't doing this. I wish I hadn't got this job. Although I did some fairly interesting jobs, having said that.
mm,
But then career, I mean, as I've often said to people, career can also be defined as a headlong rush towards destruction, can't it? Your career
mm,
towards, so it can have two meanings. Um, but I can think of another thing that I also wish I hadn't done, because when I ran the post office, there were security issues. Had two
yes,
breaks, and of course we had an alarm system, and that was one of the things that I would really dread. That in the middle of the night, you get a stormy night, my phone would ring in my bedroom, and it would be the police saying the alarm's gone off at the property you need to attend. So I would then have to drive over there in the dark, sometimes take the dog with me. I would open the door of the post office, put the dog in there, thinking, small dog is probably going to lick them to death. But it was usually a spider across the motion sensor or
yeah, yeah,
warning. It was never anything nasty. It was an unpleasant thing to have to do at sort of 3 in the morning though. So I wish I could have done
yes,
without that.
yeah. One of the things that it's reminded me of, saying that things I wish I hadn't done, actually from my main career, is that one of the schools I used to teach at, um, I ran the football team, and I had in those days I had a moped which could not um, go any faster than about 30 miles an hour, basically. And because I wasn't driving a car at the time, I used to take this probably on about a 12 or 13-mile journey to the school I taught at, and same coming back. And because it was a small school, I used to have the responsibility of washing the football kit for the team. And it was always stored in this sort of hold all, big plastic faux leather type hold all, the socks, the shorts, and the shirts when they've been used. And I used to put them with sort of bungees on the back of the moped,
Mm.
and then ride it home to watch it and bring it back. And the one time I had to go, I always had to drive across a long straight road that went across the front of a reservoir between the Black Country and Birmingham, where I was living. And I obviously hadn't done up the zip very well one day, because as I was driving across, I was aware that the moped was suddenly feeling a little bit lighter and easier to steer. And so I stopped and I looked back, and literally strewn in a line, almost like a paper chase, across this along this road were these shirts, socks, shorts that had all flown out of the back of the hold door, and actually, deposited themselves on the road. So I then had to go all the way back to pick them all up one by one, stopping at each one to pick them up because they were all sort of strewn out, um, which led to quite a bit of unpleasant language from myself as I was doing it,
I think
because it was also by that time raining.
I think you're
So
going to
it
say
was one of
that
those moments.
all ended up in the reservoir, which would have saved you the job of washing them, really, wouldn't it?
It would have done, yeah, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, it didn't. No, unfortunately not.
How about,
But of course, that was the moped where I wish I hadn't driven along the road next to it, where a driver turned across me and basically crashed into me, and wrote off the moped and put me had to go to A&E for it. And the, the beauty of the story is that. This chap turned across me, didn't see me, obviously, so it was completely his fault. When the motorcycle policeman arrived on his huge machine to question the chap about what had happened,
Mhm.
the the, the the chap who was driving said, "Well," he said, "this chap on the moped," he said, he was coming hell for leather down this road. He must have been doing 60, and he was too fast, and of course he came on me too quickly." And the motorcycle policeman literally roared with laughter, and he said, "Mate," he said, "you realise this machine couldn't do 60 downhill with the wind behind it in a hurricane." And so basically, he the chap was actually, I think he was actually prosecuted in the end, because he,
Mm.
driving without care and attention. So, but I can always remember this chap roaring with laughter and saying, "I don't think so, mate. I really don't."
Hey, how about work colleagues? Have you ever had any problematic work colleagues?
No, I've had colleagues I didn't particularly get on with,
Yeah, it's
but
inevitable,
being
really.
being in teaching, you really didn't have to mix with them too much, because they were they were rarely uh, in the same place as you, unless it was a break time or
Yeah,
before or after school.
yeah,
Um, and if there was someone you really, really didn't want to be anywhere near during the, shall we say, the lunch break, you could always have your lunch in your classroom anyway. So
yeah.
it never really sort of raised its heads for me.
No,
Yeah.
I think, generally speaking, you and I find it fairly easy to get on with most people, don't you? I mean,
Mm,
that is one of the problems with work. If you do have to work, I mean, as I've done in offices, then, you are brought sort of face to face with people sometimes that you don't get on very well with. I mean,
mm,
I say, not that I wish I hadn't worked with him really, but it was quite amusing. I mean, he was the most miserable man that I've ever known. Had a I mean, every silver cloud had a dark lining, and so as he used to come in the morning, and greet me, I thought to myself, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and get a positive comment out of him today. It was like a challenge, really, to try and make him
yeah.
say something upbeat. So I was in first in the office on a very fine summer's morning, beautiful summer's day, and sun shining outside, lovely and warm. And he came into the office, and I said, "Morning. It's a beautiful day, isn't it?" Thinking that he couldn't possibly disagree with that. He would have to say yes. You couldn't say. And he looked at me and he said, "They give it to rain later." it was just his inevitable dimension on anything. He
Yeah.
just couldn't be positive. So yeah, he was a little bit dour to work with.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
got on okay.
Of course, I mean, of course, there were being in a sort of a sort of a profession where you mix with the same people every day, and in primary schools and secondary schools, there were people who, shall we say, I wish I hadn't had a relationship with, because that made it quite difficult when said relationship
I
finished.
can imagine. Mm.
Still being in the same building and still being in the same place. So there were not many, but a couple of occasions where um, relationships finished, and then I felt I had to sometimes avoid the staff room or
Yeah,
stay well away from the corridor down that which that person might work. So
must be
yeah,
really tricky. Yeah, yeah. I never really had that problem because I mean, when I worked in IPC, which you came up to a few times, didn't you,
mm,
office, I mean, full of young people, all the same age, all early 20s, lots of very attractive people. But then I was very married at the time, so it wasn't really.
yes,
I mean, he was in a hotbed of affairs and people, nobbing off with other people all the time.
yeah,
Plenty of office gossip, but I was never the source of any of it. I don't think so.
no, no,
Um,
mm,
yeah, so that really wasn't an issue, and that was fun. I mean, it is fun. I've worked pretty much on my own for large parts of my life, and then with other people. So it,
mm,
it can be fun. I can imagine working from home must be quite difficult because you've missed the banter of office life, wouldn't you? Like,
yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah, yeah. One thing I meant to say as well is that with although my own teaching career didn't have that many sort of, which I hadn't. So there were a couple of things from what they used to call, what they now call the nighttime economy, where I almost wish I hadn't. And I used to work for about 3 or 4 months. I worked evenings as well as teaching, but the evenings were spent in a nightclub in Birmingham.
mm-hmm.
Now I wasn't pole dancing or anything like that, as you can well imagine. I was actually working behind the bar,
I
um,
see that.
but but the the club was run by should we say a fairly notorious family in Birmingham, quite a famous club. And if you were working behind the bar, you sometimes were designated to be the family's gopher, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And because they would all come in most nights and sit at one end of the bar and wine and stuff, and keep their eye on what was going on in the club, making sure it was okay. But they always had a gopher whose job that night was not to actually serve anybody else, but to just stand behind the bar near them, waiting for a signal to get them another bottle of wine.
Mm-hmm.
And and that was not the nicest situation to be in, because at the same time, one of their sort of subordinates would be sitting at the very end of the bar watching the till,
Mm.
because this was the days of the old the key tills, where you were given money and you worked out in your head, it wasn't on the till,
Yeah,
how much change to give, and give it back to the person. And they had someone watching the till, making sure that there was no, shall we say, riding the till going on.
yeah.
And at the same time, I remember one of the girls I worked with taught me how to ride the till, successfully, and create, should we say, a bit more than the pay I was getting. Um, she taught me how to do it in a quiet moment, about giving all about the change you gave and stuff, and money. Highly illegal, obviously, but I was never brave enough to do it. I knew people were doing it, and I thought, there's a bloke watching. The family are in. They have a reputation
Mm.
that, should you be caught doing it, you probably wouldn't um, walk away without some bruises of some sort. And so I never, but I always, it's one of these things where whenever I was giving change, I was absolutely petrified that I would give the wrong amount,
Yeah,
by mistake.
yeah.
And it was almost a case of, in the end, I wish I hadn't worked there because I was terrified most of the nights I was there.
Were you doing
But
that just because you didn't make enough money in your normal, teaching job?
no, I was. It was teaching was as now not particularly well paid, I have to say,
Okay.
and I tended to spend it if I earned it anyway, so
Hmm. And then
I was able to
there was one job
rack up.
that you and I did together, wasn't there, at the
Mm.
House Cafe in West Bay? Apparently, I mean, I'd forgotten this. We-
Yeah,
I don't know whether you did
yes.
it as a regular thing or just as a kind of a guest because you were staying at my place.
I was a guest because I was staying at your house. I seem to recall, and you were doing this on a reasonably regular basis, and
Working
working in the kitchen, doing some sort of menial tasks in the kitchen
mainly
as a
peeling potatoes, wasn't it? In the sort of
yeah
potato
in a machine.
in a
Yeah,
machine. That's right. You put them in, and it kind of like sandpaper all around the sides, and it turned them over. Yeah, a strange job
yeah,
one does, doesn't one? Really?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so I think if the genie is back and available, you've
Well, the genie, yeah, I mean, I think the genie's been on holiday
you,
for the last
you've got plenty
few
of
weeks, but
things that the genie could remove from your career, then, hasn't it? Haven't you? I mean, which is going to be the one that you're going to want him to take?
to be honest, I actually think not so much of my career, but I would really like him to remove the toilet cleaning in the print works because it's. I mean, I could say it's left an indelible stain on my memory because it was a print works and it was really really unpleasant.
Yeah,
I mean, it was literally just one of those things where I did it for a few weeks and then thought I just can't do this anymore.
no,
It was horrendous.
no,
Yeah.
not so.
So thank you, Jeannie. Please take that with you. That'd be great.
I think for me, I mean, like the plastics factory, the constant electric shocks. I mean, that wasn't great, but on the other hand, it was only 6 weeks. I think actually, I really wish I hadn't had the security concerns at the post office. Again,
Yeah.
that was unpleasant actually. It's hard to make fun of that, and I think I could have done without that in my life. The sort of
Mm, mm.
so I think I'd like the genie to take a, to let me sleep soundly through the night and not worry about
Yes.
things like that. Yeah,
I, I think if there's any bonus genie work to be done, I think it would be quite nice if at least one of the schools I used to work in was still standing and still a school.
of course.
Unfortunately, because they're not at the moment, and it'd be rather nice to sort of turn a corner and look at one and say, "Oh, I used to work there, and it's still standing."
But just think of all those children all through the years, David. Think back and think, oh, that Mr. Hill, what a legend. I wouldn't be the person I am today without Mr. Hill. That's your testament, isn't it? Really, you don't need a blue
Well,
on the wall.
I hope so. As long as the inference isn't, I wouldn't have been the person I am today without Mr. Hill.
No, I don't think of it like that, Dave. I'm sure it's
No,
positive.
no,
Unlike
no.
the guy I worked with, you can put a positive spin on it, can't
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, well, I think we've covered work and career quite reasonably there, John.
It's a starter. Yeah, I'm sure there'll be more to
Yeah.
come back to on another occasion, but that'll do for today, I think. Yeah. Hmm.